Allô, oui, bonjour. Dans cette vidéo, je vais lire en français pendant une semaine entière pour me préparer pour un voyage à Montréal dans quelques mois. Basically, here's the deal. My sister and my brother-in-law and my brother-in-law's entire family live in Montreal. I love Montreal. It's one of my favorite cities I've ever been to. And not only do I want to brush up on my French so that I feel capable of interacting with my French extended family and get to sort of meet them where they're at and speak French with them so that they don't always have to switch to English to accommodate the Anglophone side of the family. But also, I want to be able to enjoy Montreal as a city. I want to be able to go out to restaurants and bookstores and museums and interact with people in French, really soak up the vibes of the city. So that is why I have started a little bit of a brush up on my French project. For background, I started learning French at the age of 7 because I went to a French immersion school in Ontario, and I was never fluent, but at one point I was pretty advanced and pretty comfortable speaking French, and that's a skill that has definitely atrophied over the past decade and a bit, and it's something that I've always felt really sad about. I love French as a language. I think it's such a beautiful language. I think French culture is so incredible. French art and music and film and literature. France is a beautiful place. Quebec, one of my favorite places in Canada. So my lack of ability to express myself in French as proficiently as I once could is something I genuinely feel sadness about. So this trip is the perfect opportunity for me to have external motivation to work on my French. And I thought it'd be really fun to do a video where I not only read in French for the entire week, which I am going to do, but I also try to immerse myself in French as much as possible in all avenues. So that means only listening to French music, only watching French TV or movies, calling my francophone friends and family to catch up, and spending at least 30 minutes a day taking French classes and actively practicing my French. And that is where the sponsor of today's video comes in, Babbel. I've chosen Babbel as my language learning app of choice because they are scientifically proven to get you speaking a new language in just 3 weeks. Their lessons are developed by real teachers, not AI, which is so important for lesson structure, the order of concepts you're learning. Babbel also offers live classes, which are indispensable, in my opinion, when it comes to really embodying a new language. If you want to be able to speak your target language in the kinds of situations that come up in real life, ordering food at a restaurant, chatting with a friend about what they did over the weekend, interacting with a bookseller at a bookshop, Babbel is the app for you because they really do focus in on real-world situations, real-world conversations, not made-up scenarios that are never going to happen to you. Babbel also has a couple different subscriptions to choose from, including a lifetime subscription, and they offer a 20-day money-back guarantee. Babbel is one of the top language learning apps in the world for good reason. Babbel has a super easy-to-use app, so you can do your lessons wherever you are, no matter what's going on in your busy day. So before I decided to do this challenge, I was doing the intermediate B1 course. But when I decided to do this week-long challenge, I wanted to try another course they have, which is the refresher course for people who studied French ages ago, and it's been a minute. I have only done the first lesson so far in the refresher course. So for today's practice, I'm going to start lesson 2, the negation. Like negations with ne pas, not nothing, ne rien, nothing, and ne jamais, never, surround the inflected form of the verb. Je ne mange pas. And then I'm not eating anything would be je ne mange rien. And then do you never eat meat would be est-ce que tu ne manges jamais de viande? Est-ce que tu ne manges? And then jamais de viande.
Est-ce que tu ne manges jamais de viande?
And oui, je ne mange jamais de viande parce que je suis végétalien. Pierre ne mange jamais de légumes. Je ne suis pas végétarien.
Je ne suis pas végétarien.
The negation before a silent H or a vowel. This is also something I love about Babbel. You don't just practice a bunch of different phrases with no instruction or explanation of why you're practicing those things. So, negation before a silent H or a vowel. The word ne is apostrophized when negating verbs that begin with a silent H or a vowel. So I don't have anything would be je n'ai rien with an apostrophe. I don't eat a very balanced diet. Je ne mange pas très équilibré.
Je ne mange pas très équilibré.
because I'm not only visiting my friends and family while I'm in Montreal, but also going to be going out to restaurants and bookshops and things like that. Phrases like non merci, je ne mange pas de viande, je suis végétalien, or l'addition s'il vous plaît, are phrases that are going to come in very handy. So if there's a language you've been wanting to learn forever, or maybe like me, there's a language you have learned and have let languish in the dusty recesses of your mind, I highly recommend checking out Babbel. Click the link to get 60% off your subscription, and let me know in the comments down below what language you are learning or wanting to learn. Thank you again to Babbel for sponsoring this video. So as I mentioned, not only am I doing language practice with Babbel every day, but I'm also going to be immersing myself in French media and art. So I'm going to be listening exclusively to French music. I have a couple playlists ready to go. One is a bunch of music recommended by a bilingual friend of mine, all her favorite French music. And then I also have a playlist of all my favorite French music, which is a lot of music that I fell in love with as a child and teenager. For TV, I have the perfect show queued up. I started the first episode yesterday, and that is Love Island France. If you're a fan of Love Island, let me know in the comments. It's one of the only reality shows that I have watched for years and years. It's a favorite of mine, and I have almost exclusively watched the UK seasons, but I've recently started dipping my toe in other seasons. I watched the first season of Love Island US. I started watching L'Île d'Amour, which is the Québécois version, but I went through a super busy period and I stopped watching it, and then I kind of forgot about it, so I need to get back to that. But I heard that Love Island France was really good, so I started it last night. I watched the first episode, and I find that watching, especially reality TV, where people are just really casually and candidly speaking to each other, is one of the best ways to work on your French. Just seeing people interact and speaking person to person very casually, which is definitely an area I need to work on. So very excited to watch Love Island France. And then of course, I'm also going to be reading in French all week long. Because reading in French is significantly more effort for me than reading in English, I have decided to leave this as a very loose TBR so that I can mood read as much as possible. I'm not setting myself a super distinct goal, but I have pulled a couple French books off my shelves that I'm thinking might be good candidates. Those are kind of where I'm going to start. But then, of course, I have more French books on my shelves if those don't work out and I need to go for something else. So the books that I have on my tentative TBR are La Belle et la Bete, Beauty and the Beast, my favorite Disney movie, and I'd never read the original fairy tale in any language, so I thought it would be only fitting for me to read the fairy tale for the first time in its original language, in French, and it's super, super short, should be easy to get through, and I'm actually very excited about this. Then I also wanted to hopefully get around to reading a play during this week. For those who don't know, I have a degree in musical theater. That's what I went to college for, and I love plays. I love theater, and there are quite a few plays that I read in school, in college, that we studied that are classics that were originally written in French. And in school, we studied everything in their English translations. So for years and years, I've been wanting to read the original French of some of those plays that were some of my favorites. So one of those that I thought I might get around to this week is Le Misanthrope, The Misanthrope, by Molière. It's definitely in my top 5 favorite classic plays that I read in school. So I was thinking this might be fun to read this week. If for whatever reason I'm not vibing with this, but I still want to read a play, I also have Cyrano de Bergerac, which is another one that was a favorite while I was in school. It's a little bit longer, which is partially why I decided to choose Le Misanthrope. But if for whatever reason this isn't vibing with me, Cyrano it is. I also really wanted to try to read a literary classic this week, but most of the French classics I have on my shelves are really long. You know, I have things like Notre Dame de Paris, which is, how many pages is this? Almost 1,000. Or like The Count of Monte Cristo, which is a 2-parter, and each part is not insignificant. They also have more complicated language, which is something to keep in mind. So I thought I would pick the shortest literary classic that I had on my shelves, which was Gigi by Colette. This is only just over 200 pages, and the pages are quite little, so I'm hoping that this is something I could get through this week. I've also been meaning to read this book for a very long time, so this is a good opportunity. Then I wanted to have some non-classic options as well. Nosophobia, which is like a science fiction dystopian sort of novel, which I have always enjoyed. So I thought this might be kind of fun, and then obviously a little bit of easier language. But then, like I said, I have many other options. I have some more classics. I also have some more up here, like I have Divergent, in French, which I already read in English. So if I want something that I'm already familiar with, that's much easier language level, that could be a good option. I have some poetry. I also have a YA mystery novel. I can't remember the title right now, but I'll put the cover on the screen. But that is one that I have read a couple chapters of, and it's upstairs. So I also could potentially read that one. Ideally, my goal is to finish at least 3 books for this video, and I will be sharing my reviews, mostly in English. I'm super excited for this week of French, for immersing myself into French this week, and hopefully this video is going to be enjoyable to watch as well. I'll try to get some clips of myself doing various French things. Yeah, this is going to be fun. I'm nervous too, but I'm excited. So grab a hot drink if that's your thing, get cozy, and hang out with me while I read in French for an entire week.
Commenter genre je sais pas si c'est l'image que tu te donnes, mais moi je préfère que j'aime beaucoup les mecs genre simples, genre non, je trouve que t'en fais trop un peu. Laisse-moi venir vers toi, laisse-moi te draguer, laisse-moi, tu vois, le mot d'ordre entre nous c'est chill, ok, chill.
Je vais.
Je vais.
Tu vas.
Tu vas.
Faire un voyage en Afrique.
Nous allons faire un voyage en Afrique.
Il y a un orage.
Il y a un orage.
Va-t-il faire beau?
Va-t-il faire beau? Ok, je viens de terminer La Belle et la Bête, pas seulement cette version qui est pour les enfants, mais aussi la version originale par Villeneuve. I did not originally realize that this is not the original version. This is a version written by Madame Beaumont. I believe it was about 16 years after the original, longer version written by Villeneuve, which was aimed at adults or young adults, as far as I can tell. So I finished reading this and went on Goodreads to mark it as read, and very quickly realized that the version I had just read was not the version I had on my TBR on Goodreads. It was a different version, so luckily I was able to find an ebook version of the original French text, but j'ai quelques pensées. Basically, this version of the story is in some ways quite similar to the version most of us are familiar with. There are some of those sort of key plot points that are the same, but there are a lot of liberties taken in the Disney version, especially as one might expect, but also even just this children's version diverts from the original somewhat. I think one of the things that surprised me most about both of these versions is that Belle is not an only child. Belle is the sixth child and has 3 older brothers and 2 older sisters. And in both this version and the original version, her brothers seem to love her. It seems like they have a good relationship. She has a good relationship with her father, but her 2 older sisters are incredibly jealous of her and hate her and are just all around awful. Very reminiscent of the evil stepsisters in Cinderella. That's the vibe. And while I understand that this story was written in a very, very different time, centuries ago, I can't say that I enjoy reading the very sexist trope of older women being incredibly jealous of younger women for their beauty and goodness and just being these bitter, less attractive older ladies. It's just such an overused, gross trope, and maybe at the time it wasn't overused, although I will say from what I've read of older stories, classics, fairy tales, the sort of old, bitter, evil spinster or stepmother or older sibling is very common, and I'm just not a fan. So just starting off there, the fact that in both stories the sisters really get no redemption and are always portrayed in a very one-dimensional way as really crappy and very materialistic and just not very nice in general is unfortunate. I didn't love that. And of course, no male characters are portrayed in that way. Even the Beast, who is, supposed to be a beast, is, especially in the children's version, but honestly in both, portrayed as pretty chill and kind and nice from basically the beginning. He's never really a villain. He lets her go home to visit her family. He gives her whatever she wants. He's very polite. He asks her repeatedly in this version to marry him, and in the original version, if they can sleep together. Not sure if that was meant to be a euphemism or not, but it made me chortle every time I came across him repeatedly asking her if she wanted to sleep together. Every time she says no, and he's just like, okay, cool. See you tomorrow. I don't love the gender dynamics, okay? That's what I'm trying to get around to. I find them a little off-putting. In terms of the story itself, I would say I found it interesting to read this version and to sort of see where the story comes from. I definitely prefer the shorter children's version. I think there are some things that could have been included. It is very short, and maybe it could have used a little bit more of that backstory, a tiny bit more detail here and there. It's very succinct. Gets from A to B to C quickly and efficiently without feeling like it's rushing through it. You still get some detail of the characters and the setting, but it doesn't drag on forever. It's just a very efficiently put together children's story, and I imagine that is why this is the version that is sort of the one that's stuck in our collective consciousness, or at least it birthed the versions that are stuck in our collective consciousness. The original version by Villeneuve is very verbose. My God, very, very, very detailed and incredibly repetitive at times, which is, it's something I have come to expect out of classic literature and just older writing in general. It does tend to be more descriptive and a little less tightly paced. Which, isn't necessarily a problem, but I definitely found in the original version of La Belle et la Bête, it was just a bit much, okay? The first half isn't as bad as the second half, but the prince has his transformation and becomes a human basically halfway through the book. And then the whole second half is just going back and explaining the whole backstory. First, the prince goes back and explains everything that happened to him and why he was cursed. And it goes on for page after page after page after page after page after page. It just goes on forever. He cannot tell a succinct story to save his life. And then once he's done, the queen shows up and is like, yeah, there's no way a merchant's daughter is marrying my son. He's royalty, not gonna happen. And then the good fairy tells Belle's backstory by starting way before the beginning by also giving the backstory of Belle's mom, and goes on and 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 on, and talks about how she liked to disguise herself as various animals, especially serpents, so that she could spy on Belle and make sure she was doing well. The good fairy also cannot tell a succinct story to save her life. And honestly, I can relate. I can't tell a succinct story either. But when you're writing a book, ideally you kind of edit that down. And I started to kind of feel like I was losing my mind. It was not going well. So for that reason, because the pacing is just so unbalanced and off in the original version, in my personal opinion, and obviously from a modern standpoint or perspective, there were things about it that I didn't love, largely the portrayal of women, both the negative portrayals, but also the portrayal of Belle in this version, especially, maybe just because it's aimed at children, it's even more blatant, but it really does feel like Belle is being portrayed as the most perfect, humble, holier than thou kind of person. And I can kind of understand why her sisters would find her insufferable, because she truly is in this version. I read a really interesting article that was saying that the original story by Villeneuve was written as a bit of a critique of arranged marriages for young women to older men, and that the children's version was rewritten for children and then also kind of shifted to be the opposite message, where it was basically trying to reassure young girls that even if they had an arranged marriage to an older man who seemed like a beast, who was scary and menacing and hairy and old and all of those things, that if they were humble and sweet and kind, they would come to love him and everything would work out just fine. It was trying to get girls more comfortable with their fate of being sold off like livestock to older men. Also unsettling. I'm somewhere around a 3 or 4 stars for the children's version, and then for the full-length original version, I think I'm solidly on a 3-star. There were things about it I really liked that I found interesting. I think Belle comes across a lot less simplistic and pious and holier than thou. She's a lot more likable in the original version, for me anyway. She's a little bit more complex. We get more development of her relationship with her father and her siblings, which I did like. And I did enjoy getting more of the backstories, even though they went on for far too long. So I guess there are different things that I like and don't like about both versions. And maybe both of them are a 3-star for different reasons. That might be the most fair way for me to rate them. Oh, I'm going to do a short spoiler section. Obviously, I'm talking about something that's centuries old, but if you're only familiar with the Disney version, for example, like I was, not only are Belle and the prince cousins, which, first cousins getting together was more common back then. So I'm going to not judge that part of the story. But something I can judge is the fact that the prince was cursed because he was raised by a fairy who he saw as his mother and called mother, and she saw him as her son. And then eventually she was like, actually, I want you to see me as your lover. So you're going to start seeing me as your lover now. I'm in love with you. Let's get together. And the prince was like, no, what? Why? Let's not. And then she got mad and cursed him. And that is disturbing. And I am glad that the prince was like, yeah, no, thank you. And eventually managed to have a happy ending despite the predatory, grooming, incest adjacent situation that he was forced into. Fun times. I think that's all I have to say about La Belle et la Bête. I wanted to mention how I was annotating as I was reading. I was basically solely annotating in this version for words that I wasn't familiar with. So I was using my clear sticky notes and a highlighter and a little pen to mark the words I didn't know and then write a very short definition or a synonym or sometimes a translation. And then I also added a little sticky note on some of the pages where I was talking about different forms of verbs. I was using my ultimate French review and practice book, which I bought years ago, to go in and find a specific verb so that I could write, okay, this is third person, plural, passé simple, notes like that. Because me and French grammar are not like this. We're like this. I've always struggled with French grammar. I find it very complicated and my brain doesn't like it. So I was trying to use it as a teachable moment. And then for the ebook version of the original story as I was reading, I had different colors of highlighting for different things. So I would highlight in blue if I didn't recognize a word. And the nice thing about reading on Kindle is that when you do select or highlight something, it immediately pops up with a dictionary, and it does it even in other languages. So a French dictionary would come up, so I'd immediately be able to read the definition. And then if I wanted to highlight something, like highlight a quote, something was plot relevant or interesting, I would highlight it in pink. And then anything that I found unsettling or that I didn't like so much, I highlighted in yellow. That is La Belle et la Bête. At the end of the day, I am glad that I read both because I think they're both interesting for different reasons, and they both help to paint a fuller picture of the history of this fairy tale and this story that has been a big part of my life since a very young age, because I've watched Beauty and the Beast about 5 billion times. Quite an experience all around. I've also been watching some Love Island France, which has been lots of fun. I am struggling a little bit at times because there are no French subtitles available where I'm watching it, which means that there are times that characters have heavier accents, or they're, it's late at night, so they're not speaking super clearly, or multiple people are speaking at once, and my brain just stutters and I cannot keep up with what they're saying. But for the most part, I've been able to follow what's happening, which is nice, and I'm starting to get more invested, which is fun. I've also heard good things about the 1946 La Belle et la Bête film, so I found it and I'm excited to watch it. And I've reached out to my sister and brother-in-law to see if they want to watch it together, because I think that could be fun. And I've also been listening to lots of French music, which has been fun. I've been listening to mostly Damien Robitaille, he's probably my favorite French artist. I just enjoy his music so much, especially his 2009 album, Autonome. I love that album. I have no idea if it's popular in general or if Damien Robitaille is a popular artist in the francophone culture. I don't even know how I discovered him in the first place, but I've been a big fan since I did. And Autonome is my favorite album of his, and I know every single word to every song. And I have a great time every time I put it on. And I also decided to start on Elsie, dernière fois. This is the book that I was talking about in the intro that I had started that was like a YA mystery. I had only read the prologue and first chapter, so I went back and reread that because I had a vague memory of what happened, but it had been a minute. So I'm now caught up again to where I was before, and I'm excited to keep reading. I found an audiobook version as well, which is fun, so that I can sort of trade off between reading with my eyes and listening if I need to get some work done or go for a walk or do some errands or whatever. I do find it significantly more difficult to find audiobooks of French books that I'm reading, but luckily I was able to find one of this. So this is the next one I'm reading, and I feel like it's very appropriate for this time of year because it is supposed to be mysterious and kind of spooky. So hopefully it'll give me October Halloween vibes along with still fitting this prompt of being a French book. I definitely feel like my brain was melting at various times reading La Belle et la Bête. It's an older form of French, and sometimes, I could just feel my brain working at a much higher level than it normally has to when I read. I normally don't have to put that much effort in when I'm reading. So I'm excited to go to something contemporary and much simpler writing because it's for a younger demographic than the adult version of La Belle et la Bête. I've also, of course, been doing my daily lessons with Babbel. Those have been going well, at times humbling, but also going well. I feel like it's waking up parts of my brain that have been asleep for a long time, helping me kind of rewire some of those connections that have gone, dusty and rusty with misuse. I think it's going well. I'm excited to keep going on this challenge. Even though y'all will be seeing this in the future when I'm finished this week of French, if you have recommendations for French books you think I would like, French music, French artists I should check out, TV shows, movies that I would enjoy, anything, leave those in the comments down below. I would love to find more French media to check out, and I'm sure that there are at least some people watching this video who would also love to find more French books, TV shows, movies, and music to check out. So leave those suggestions down there. Mais je suis très fatiguée, alors je vais dire bonne nuit et te parler bientôt.
Fiona, souhaites-tu suivre le choix du public en formant un couple avec Issa ou préfères-tu rester avec Sacha, ton partenaire initial? Fiona, quelle est ta décision?
Alors chez Sam, j'ai tout de suite aimé son physique. Et on a commencé à discuter et en fait, je me suis dit que je refaisais la même erreur que l'an passé. C'est-à-dire aller vers un physique, avoir une personnalité. Et c'est vrai que Issam hier soir a dit que qu'il était déçu. Et je ne pense pas être décevante.
Et t'es vachement aussi à expliquer ce que tu veux, comment tu te sens. Je sais que même devant tout le monde, à Sydney, tu t'exprimais vraiment.
Avec lui, on a vu vraiment, genre, je me sens pas moi-même. Genre, j'ai pas envie de rigoler avec lui. Mais je préfère pas être avec toi, par exemple.
Faire de la danse, avoir le temps d'aller danser. Are you helping, Chewie? Danser samedi.
Tu as le temps d'aller danser samedi?
Je danse comme ci, comme ça.
Je danse comme ci, comme ça.
Marc, tu as le temps d'aller danser samedi?
Marc, tu as le temps d'aller danser samedi?
Oui, j'ai le temps, mais Nadège, je ne sais pas danser.
Oui, j'ai le temps, mais Nadège, je ne sais pas danser.
Ce n'est pas grave, je ne danse pas bien non plus.
Ce n'est pas grave, je ne danse pas bien non plus.
Salut les amis, je suis de retour avec une dernière mise à jour après avoir terminé Elise, une dernière fois, et le Misanthrope. I enjoyed this. It was fun, easy to read, quick, especially compared to the other books I've read this week that are all hundreds of years old. Reading something more contemporary and also aimed at late teens was like a breath of fresh air. It was so much easier for me to read. I read it so much more quickly. There were far fewer words that I didn't recognize or had to look up. Just a much easier experience all around, which was what I was hoping for, to have at least one book that I could sort of fly through at my normal pace. So I was really happy to have that. And I liked Elsie as a main character. I thought she was really relatable, felt very real in her grief. The inciting incident of the book is the loss of her basically grandmother, her stand-in grandmother, a neighbor, family friend who she is very, very close to, like a grandmother. And her passing causes Elsie to have a lot of grief and pain and sets various things in motion that lead to some paranormal discoveries and some spookiness. I thought her reactions to losing Francine were very relatable, and I felt like I could see myself in her when I lost my grandmother. And so that sort of portrayal of grief and loss and that intergenerational friendship and connection, that relationship, felt very true. And I've inferred from the author's note that Francine was based on a character in the author's own life and someone she had that kind of a relationship with. So it did feel very grounded in reality, and I liked that. I will say, in terms of the plot, it was a little meh for me. I didn't find it particularly spooky most of the time. There were a couple little glimmers of spookiness or creepiness that sort of jumped out, but for the most part, it wasn't that spooky. It wasn't that creepy. Not that much happened. I did find the pacing was a little off. It was very slow to ramp up, and then just suddenly everything was happening very fast, and our main character made a decision that was incredibly extreme on very little information. It felt a little bit like Whiplash, where we've been slowly building to something and then skipped over all of this sort of building eerie creepiness and immediately jumped to the, climax ghost-busting moment. So plot-wise, I was a little bit less intrigued. It wasn't awful by any means, but it didn't give me that creepy atmosphere that I was hoping for from a paranormal book, and I didn't find it scary. And I am a scaredy cat. I'm very easy to scare. So, it's saying something that nothing about it was eerie or creepy to me. So for me, this is probably about a 3-star read. I enjoyed it. It was easy, quick to read, entertaining. I really liked the characters and the exploration of Elsie and Francine's relationship. I found that very touching and grounded and relatable, as I said. It was just the sort of spooky paranormal elements that let me down a little bit, a lack in atmosphere. So I think 3 stars is kind of fair for this, sort of middle of the road. I am considering reading the next in the series just because I feel like this is a really great level for me, French-wise, where I can read it very quickly at my regular pace and not miss anything, but still, occasionally come across a word that I'm not super familiar with or saying and look it up and add a little bit more to my vocabulary without feeling too overwhelmed or having to go so slowly that I start to lose interest. So I might keep reading the series just for that purpose, for my French practice, more so than feeling some sort of deep urge to know what happens next. But I do like Elsie, and I am curious to know what happens next for her. This is the author's debut novel, as far as I know, so I would love to see her continue to improve upon her delivery of the creepy, spooky atmosphere over time, So that's Elsie in Dernière fois. And then the final thing I read for this video was Le Misanthrope par Molière. Like I said, I read this play, studied this play in theater school in college, but we studied it in English. And I will say that as much as I enjoy this in English, and I do, I think the play shines so much more in the original French. People who translate plays, like my sister, she translates plays, I bow down to them because I don't even know how you could begin to bring the same feeling in one language out in another, because I really do feel that different languages have such a different feeling to them, especially when you're looking at a play like The Misanthrope, where it's in verse and it rhymes and there's a very distinct rhythm to it, and each character has their own rhythm, but there's also sort of an overall rhythm for the entire play, and they pass things off like a game of ping pong or tennis. It's very much witty banter, but to a very specific degree, almost like Shakespeare and iambic pentameter. So the idea of translating this into English and still getting the meaning across, but also continuing the rhyming scheme and having a similar rhythm and that similar pacing boggles the mind. I do not know how people do that. It's amazing. But despite how amazing the translators of something like this are, the original is just so much more sparkling. I feel like the wit really shines through, the humor, all of those layers of subtext and meaning and commentary just shine through on a different level. So it was really a glorious experience to read it in French, although I will say it was a challenge because this was written in the 1600s, the 17th century. This was written in the 17th century. That was a while ago. And while in some ways it's kind of shocking how modern it feels, both in the social commentary and the thematic content, I do feel that it is very modern and very now in its commentary. I think that this could very easily apply to a world and a society that has been influenced by social media. In this case, it's more so characters who are sort of being false, speaking behind other people's backs, being two-faced, presenting one image to one group of people and a different image to another group, because they're sort of part of the French court near the king and they feel the need to flatter everyone and be on everyone's good side. But I do think that it can translate, like I said, to a more modern social media type world where presenting one side of yourself on social media and having a different side at home, or I think we've all known somebody or even done it ourselves once or twice where we're very friendly to someone's face and then when they leave, we're like, oh, thank God they're gone because they're not our cup of tea. But we feel like we should be polite. And some people take it to another level where they're really bad talking people and then pretending to be their best friend when they walk in the room. So it's still very relevant, and Alceste's hatred of humanity and their duplicity is relatable on many levels, even though, of course, he takes it to a comedic extreme and sort of shoves himself into a corner, despising all of humanity and wanting to go live in a desert somewhere alone so that he never has to deal with humanity again. I wouldn't take it that far, but I can relate to finding humans frustrating for sure. So I really, really enjoyed reading this in French. My favorite character, as it was the first time I read this and studied it, is Philinte. He's the best. He's Alceste's best friend, basically. And he's so funny. I feel like every moment that I genuinely laughed out loud, it was a Philinte line. Like, he understands Alceste at such a deep level and loves him, but also just rolls his eyes at his ridiculousness. And it's like, dude, chill out. He notices all the hypocrisy that's going on, both with, the cast of characters as a whole, but also specifically with Alceste. He really is, in my mind, the everyman that pulls the audience into the story. He is us, being able to view everything and be a little bit of an outsider while still, having a relationship with people. But for the most part, he's sort of commenting on the ideas being presented and the drama that's unfolding. And he's great. I find him hilarious and fantastic. I wrote at one point, where is it? Here, Philinte is such a troll, which he is. He knows exactly how to push Elsie's buttons to make him just like go off the rails. And it's very entertaining. It kind of feels like a brotherly vibe, like a sibling dynamic. I really, really enjoyed this. Definitely more challenging for my French. Definitely felt like my brain was melting from time to time. I don't know why I filled this week with so many centuries-old classics instead of reading more contemporary works, but I am a glutton for punishment, apparently. But it was fantastic. Had a great time. I would give it 5 stars, I think. The Misanthrope is fantastic. I'm a fan. I think it's great. It has a message. It's saying something, but it's also funny and witty and has amazing pacing and is lots of fun. So those are the books I read for this video, and my brain truly does feel a little bit like mush, like all the wires are being crossed between French and English, and I don't know where to go or what to do in the best possible way. I've been making progress on my Babbel French course, doing my lessons every single day. I have made it further into Love Island, and I'm really enjoying it. I'm on board with some of the couples that are starting to form. I'm getting into the drama. So I've had an amazing time doing this challenge for myself, as much as I feel a little bit exhausted from all the effort I've been putting in, really working my brain on a different level. But it's felt really great. I do feel like my French muscles are sort of waking up more in a way that they just weren't doing with less immersion. So thank you for coming along on this journey with me. It was so much fun. Thank you again to Babbel for sponsoring this video and for helping me so much with the foundation of this challenge of bringing my French back, reminding me of the grammar rules, giving me those lessons, helping me to practice, especially with things like pronunciation and remembering how to order sentences. That's something that always trips me up. So very grateful to Babbel. Don't forget to click the link to get 60% off your subscription. And with that, I'm going to get going. Merci beaucoup d'avoir regardé et à très bientôt dans la prochaine vidéo. Adieu, chers amis. Bye, friends.